A 68-year-old retired engineer, widowed for 3 years, lives peacefully in his rented Chicago apartment when his greedy landlord decides to cut the heat in the dead of January winter to force him out. What the landlord didn't know is that he was dealing with a man who spent 40 years documenting complex systems, knows every line of the Illinois housing code, and possesses a methodical patience that transforms compliance into an art of war. As temperatures plummet to 15 degrees Celsius, our protagonist doesn't call 311 or complain on social media. Instead, he transforms his frozen apartment into an operations center, documents every violation with surgical precision, discovers that 23 other tenants are being systematically exploited, and orchestrates a campaign of malicious compliance that will cost the landlord not just $847,000 in fines and repairs, but his reputation, his property license, and eventually the entire building. Revenge wasn't served hot. It was served at the exact temperature specified by Chicago Municipal Code, Section 5 to 12-110, 68 degrees here during the day, 66 degrees at night. And every degree below that cost $500 per day, per apartment, retroactive to 18 months. Before we begin this story of meticulous and satisfying justice, I ask that you, like this video if you believe exploitative landlords deserve to face the consequences of their actions. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where intelligence and patience defeat. Read comment below your own experience with problematic landlords, or moments where compliance saved the day. Share with anyone who needs to know that tenants have rights, and those rights have sharp teeth now. Let's meet Robert Mitchell and discover how a 68-year-old man transformed a brutal winter into the worst financial decision his landlord ever made. My landlord cut my heat on January 12th at 3:47 a.m. when the temperature outside was negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. I know the exact time because I'm an engineer, and engineers document everything. What Victor Kozlov didn't know when he flipped that circuit breaker was that he'd just made the most expensive mistake of his life. By the time I was finished, his little power play would cost him $847,000, his property management license, and ownership of the entire building. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 68-year-old widower turned malicious compliance into an art form. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm nobody special. Retired mechanical engineer, 40 years at Caterpillar designing hydraulic systems. My wife Margaret died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. After she passed, I sold our house in Naperville. Too many memories, too many empty rooms. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment at 2847 North Sheffield Avenue in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. Unit 4B, $1,450 a month, which was reasonable for the area. The building was a 3-story brick walk-up built in 1923, 24 units total. Classic Chicago architecture with radiator heat and original hardwood floors. Victor Kozlov bought the building in March 2022, real estate investor type. Late 40s, slicked back hair, expensive suits that didn't quite fit right. The kind of guy who drove a leased Mercedes and talked constantly about his portfolio. He owned 7 buildings across the north side, all of them older properties he'd picked up cheap and was slowly squeezing for maximum profit. I'd seen his type before. Guys who think building codes are suggestions and tenant rights are inconveniences. For the first 6 months, everything was fine. Victor was hands-off. Maintenance requests got handled eventually. The building manager, Teresa Gonzalez, was competent and fair. She'd been managing the property for the previous owner and stayed on when Victor took over. But in October 2022, things started changing. Small things at first. The hallway lights that used to get replaced within a week now stayed burnt out for months. The front door lock that needed repair sat broken for 6 weeks. Teresa seemed frustrated every time I saw her. Then in December, Victor fired Teresa, replaced her with his nephew, a 23-year-old kid named Dmitri, who'd never managed anything more complicated than a video game inventory. Dmitri showed up twice a month to collect rent checks and disappeared. Maintenance requests went unanswered. The boiler started making concerning noises. The kind of sounds that tell an engineer something's wrong with the pressure relief valve. I submitted a work order. Nothing happened. January 11th, 2023, Thursday evening. I was reading in my recliner when I heard arguing in the hallway. Raised voices. I recognized one of them. Mrs. Chen from 3C. She was 76 years old, lived alone, taught piano lessons from her apartment. The other voice was Victor's. The building is being renovated, he was saying. I need all month-to-month tenants to vacate by February 1st. Mrs. Chen's voice was shaking. But I've lived here for 18 years. My lease says month-to-month tenants get 60 days notice. The notice is in your mailbox. You have 3 weeks. I opened my door. Victor was standing in the hallway with Dimitri. Mrs. Chen looked like she'd been crying. Is there a problem? I asked. Victor turned to me with that practiced smile. No problem, Mr. Mitchell. Just informing tenants about the upcoming renovations. What renovations? Updating the building systems. Bringing everything up to code. It's all very exciting. I looked at Mrs. Chen. She was clutching an eviction notice. Not a renovation notice. An eviction. Victor, I said carefully, Mrs. Chen has rights under the Chicago Residential Landlord and Tenant Ordinance. You can't just evict month-to-month tenants without cause. His smile disappeared. I'm not evicting anyone. I'm choosing not to renew month-to-month agreements. Perfectly legal. It's legal with proper notice. 60 days, not 21? Victor stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your concern for Mrs. Chen, but this doesn't involve you. Your lease doesn't expire until June, so you have nothing to worry about. Unless you'd like to make this your problem too. It was a threat, barely veiled. But I'd spent 40 years dealing with corporate bullies who thought engineers were pushovers. I'm just making sure everyone knows their rights, I said evenly. Victor stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled again. Of course, everyone should know their rights. Have a good evening, Mr. Mitchell. He left with Dimitri. Mrs. Chen was still shaking. Robert, what am I going to do? I can't afford to move. Rent everywhere else is $2,000 or more. Don't worry, I told her. He can't legally evict you with 3 weeks' notice. I'll help you fight this. That was my first mistake. Not helping Mrs. Chen, that was the right thing to do. My mistake was thinking Victor would respond like a rational person instead of a vindictive child. January 12th, 3:47 a.m. I woke up freezing. My apartment was absolutely frigid. I could see my breath in the air. The radiator was stone cold. I checked the thermostat I'd installed. 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperature, according to my weather app, was negative 15 degrees. I put on my winter coat and went to check the basement. The boiler room door was locked. New padlock. Industrial grade. I knocked on Dimitri's apartment. No answer. I called his cell phone. Straight to voicemail. By 8 a.m., my apartment was down to 43 degrees. I called Victor directly. Mr. Mitchell, he answered, sounding annoyed. Do you know what time it is? The heat is out in the building. The boiler room is locked. We need emergency service. I'm aware of the situation. The boiler is being serviced in the middle of January. During a cold snap, these things happen. I've ordered space heaters for all units. Dimitri will distribute them this afternoon. Victor, it's negative 15 degrees outside. This is illegal. Chicago Municipal Code section 5 to 12 by 110 requires landlords to provide heat of at least 68 degrees during the day and 66 at night from September 15th through June 1st. Silence. Then, are you threatening me, Mr. Mitchell? I'm citing the law. The law also says tenants need to pay rent on time. Your rent is due today, January 12th. I'll expect your check by 5 p.m. As for the heat, Dimitri will handle it. He hung up. I sat in my freezing apartment, wearing my winter coat, gloves, and a hat. This wasn't about boiler maintenance. This was retaliation for defending Mrs. Chen. Victor had cut the heat deliberately, but he'd made a critical error. He'd targeted an engineer, someone who spent 4 decades building systems, documenting processes, and understanding exactly how things work and exactly how they fail. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled 2847N Sheffield Documentation. Then I began what would become an 18-month project of meticulous, surgical, beautiful compliance. First, I needed data. I pulled up my utility company app and downloaded 18 months of gas usage for the building. Victor had taken over in March 2022. I compared gas consumption month by month to the previous owner's records. The pattern was striking. Under the old owner, gas usage in winter months averaged 247 therms per month. Under Victor, it had dropped to 189 therms. He'd been running the boiler lower than required to save money for 10 months. Next, I checked Chicago's Department of Buildings online portal. Every building inspection, violation, and permit is public record. Victor's other 6 properties had a combined total of 143 housing code violations in the past 2 years. Heat-related violations, pest infestations, electrical hazards, water damage. The average fine per violation was $500 to $1,000. Most went unpaid. Victor had a system. Rack up violations, ignore them, pay the minimum when forced, and keep collecting rent. I created a spreadsheet. Column 1, date. Column 2, violation type. Column 3, property address. Column 4, fine amount. Column 5, resolution status. I spent 6 hours compiling data. By the time I finished, I had a comprehensive picture of Viktor Kozlov's business model. He was a slumlord. Professional, systematic, and profitable. At 2 p.m., Dmitri knocked on my door with a space heater. "Here you go, Mr. Mitchell. Should keep you warm until the boiler is fixed." The space heater was a cheap Chinese model rated for 1,500 watts. I calculated the math. My apartment was 650 square feet with 10-foot ceilings, 6,500 cubic feet of space. In negative 15-degree weather, that space heater would struggle to maintain 55 degrees, nowhere near the legally required 68. "When will the boiler be fixed?" I asked. Dmitri shrugged. Uncle Victor said maybe a week. A week. "Dmitri, that's illegal." He said if people don't like it, they can move. There it was. The real plan. Make the building so uncomfortable that month-to-month tenants leave voluntarily. No eviction hearings, no legal challenges. Just force people out through misery. I plugged in the space heater. It hummed to life, producing a pathetic amount of warmth. Then I pulled out my phone and took 17 photographs. The space heater's model number and wattage label. My thermostat reading of 43 degrees. The frozen condensation on my windows. The radiator's temperature gauge reading 51 degrees. The exterior thermometer showing negative 15. I time-stamped everything and uploaded it to my documentation folder. That night, I slept in my winter coat under 3 blankets. The space heater ran constantly, driving my electric bill up while keeping the temperature at barely 52 degrees. At 11:47 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. It was James Patterson from 4C. Retired postal worker, 71 years old, lived alone. "Robert, my space heater stopped working. Do you have an extra blanket?" I gave him 2 of mine. "Have you called Dmitri?" 3 times. No answer. I looked at James. He was shivering. "How cold is your apartment?" 41 degrees last time I checked. 41 degrees. That was dangerous. Hypothermia territory for an elderly person. "James, you can't stay there tonight. It's not safe. I don't have anywhere else to go. My daughter lives in Oregon." I made a decision. "You're staying here tonight. I'll take the couch, you take the bed." "Robert, I can't." "James, you're staying here. Non-negotiable." He stayed. We kept the space heater running all night. My electric meter was probably spinning like a turbine, but at least neither of us would freeze to death. January 13th, Friday morning. I woke up at 6 a.m. and made a phone call that would change everything. I called the Chicago Department of Buildings Housing Inspection Division. "Inspector Services, this is Angela." "Good morning, Angela. I need to report multiple housing code violations at 2847 North Sheffield Avenue. No heat in the building for 36 hours. Temperature in units below 45 degrees. 24 units affected. Elderly and vulnerable residents at risk." Angela's tone changed immediately. "Sir, that's an emergency violation. Can you provide documentation?" "I have photographs with timestamps. utility records showing reduced gas consumption, and witness statements from multiple tenants. We'll have an inspector there today. What's your name? Robert Mitchell, Unit 4B. Mr. Mitchell, if this is verified, the landlord is facing immediate penalties of $500 per day per unit, plus potential criminal charges if anyone is injured. $500 per day per unit. 24 units. That was $12,000 per day. I did the math in my head. If the heat had been inadequate for 10 months, as my utility record suggested, that was approximately 300 days. Times $12,000. That was $3.6 million in potential fines. But I kept that calculation to myself. I just want the heat turned back on, I told Angela. An inspector will be there between 2 and 4 this afternoon. The landlord will be notified. At 9:17 a.m., Victor called me. He was screaming. You called the fucking city on me? You filed a complaint? I reported that we have no heat, Victor. That's not a complaint. That's a public safety issue. You're going to regret this, old man. I'm going to make your life hell. The law requires you to provide heat. I'm just asking you to follow the law. Fuck the law. And fuck you. You want to play games? Let's play games. He hung up. I sat in my 48-degree apartment wearing thermal underwear, 2 sweaters, and a winter coat. Victor thought he was playing games. He had no idea he'd just declared war on someone who spent 40 years reading technical specifications and who considered documentation a form of meditation. That afternoon, Inspector Maria Santos arrived at 2:34 p.m. She was thorough, spent 3 hours checking every unit in the building. She carried a digital thermometer and an infrared camera. I watched her document everything. At 5:15 p.m., she knocked on my door. Mr. Mitchell, I've completed my inspection. 24 units are below the required temperature. Average temperature across units is 46 degrees. This is a Class A violation with immediate penalties. What happens now? I'm issuing a cease and desist order. The landlord must restore heat within 24 hours or face daily fines of $500 per unit. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the Corporation Council for potential criminal prosecution. She handed me a copy of the violation notice. It was beautiful. 3 pages of detailed findings, photographs, and legal citations. Victor's name was at the top in bold letters. Inspector Santos, can I ask you something? Of course. The utility records show the boiler has been running below code requirements for approximately 10 months. Would that affect the penalties? She looked at me with new interest. Do you have documentation of that? I handed her my spreadsheet and the utility company records. She studied them for 5 minutes. Mr. Mitchell, if this is accurate, the landlord has been in continuous violation since March 2022. That's 317 days of violations across 24 units. The fines would be retroactive. I did the math again. 317 days times 24 units times 500 per day. That was $3,804,000 in fines, plus the emergency penalties for the current heat outage. Victor Kozlov had just gone from small-time slumlord to facing financial ruin, and I'd barely started. Inspector Santos left. I made dinner, heated soup on my electric hot plate since the gas stove wasn't working properly either. Then I did something that would prove critical. I created a group text message for the building, all 24 units. I'd collected phone numbers over the past 18 months by organizing building events. Margaret had taught me the importance of community before she died. The message was simple. Building tenants. Inspector from City of Chicago visited today. Documented heat violations. Landlord has 24 hours to restore heat or face 500-day fines per unit. Know your rights. Heat must be minimum 68 degrees of day, 66 degrees of night, Sept 15 June 1st. Robert Mitchell 4B. Within an hour, I had 19 responses. People I'd never spoken to were suddenly telling their stories. Mrs. Chen. He raised my rent 3 times in 8 months. James from 4C. My ceiling has been leaking for 6 weeks. No repairs. Maria from 2A. He kept my security deposit for normal wear and tear. The stories kept coming. 24 units, 24 tales of exploitation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about heat. This was about a predator who'd been systematically abusing vulnerable people. Mostly elderly, mostly fixed income, mostly too scared or too tired to fight back. But they had something now they didn't have before. They had documentation. They had an engineer who knew how to build a case. And they had rage that had been simmering for months, finally finding a release valve. At 11:47 p.m., I sent a second message to the group. Meeting tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. in lobby. Bring any documentation of violations, unpaid repairs, illegal charges. Let's compare notes. This ends now. I expected maybe 5 people to show up. I got 22. But before that meeting could happen, Victor made his second catastrophic mistake. He decided to escalate. January 14th, 6:23 a.m. I woke to pounding on my door. Heavy, aggressive pounding. I checked the peephole. Victor and 2 other men. Large men. The kind you hire for intimidation. I didn't open the door. "Mr. Mitchell," Victor shouted through the door. "Open up! We need to discuss your behavior." "It's 6 in the morning, Victor. Come back at a reasonable hour. Open the fucking door, or I'll have it removed. I own this building." I pulled out my phone and started recording audio. "Victor, I'm not opening my door to you and 2 strangers at 6 a.m. If you have something to discuss, send an email or call during business hours. You called the city on me. You're organizing tenants against me. That's harassment. Reporting housing code violations is not harassment. It's protected activity under Illinois law. I want you out of this building today. My lease runs through June. You can't evict me without cause. I'll find cause." Trust me, the pounding started again. One of the men with Victor was kicking the door. I could hear wood splintering. I dialed 911. "This is Robert Mitchell at 2847 North Sheffield Unit 4B. My landlord and 2 men are attempting to break down my door. I feel threatened." The dispatcher stayed on the line. "Officers are en route. Stay on the phone with me." The kicking stopped. I heard Victor's voice quieter now. "Fuck, come on, we're leaving." They were gone by the time police arrived 8 minutes later. But I had the audio recording, threats, attempted forced entry. Witness statements from 4 neighbors who'd heard the commotion. The police filed a report. Case number 2023-047821. Another piece of documentation for my growing file. At 10 a.m., 22 tenants gathered in the lobby. I brought my laptop, my spreadsheets, and 40 years of engineering discipline. What happened in that 2-hour meeting would eventually cost Viktor Kozlov everything. I stood in front of 22 people who'd been pushed around long enough. Mrs. Chen was there with her 18 years of rent receipts. James had photographs of his leaking ceiling. Maria from 2A had text messages from Dmitri ignoring maintenance requests. An elderly couple from 1B, the Johnsons, brought documentation of a bedbug infestation that had gone untreated for 4 months. "Here's what I know," I started. "The city of Chicago has documented heat violations. Victor has 24 hours to restore heat or face $12,000 in daily fines. But that's just the beginning." I opened my laptop and projected my spreadsheet onto the wall using a portable projector I'd brought. "I've compiled data on all of Victor's properties. He owns 7 buildings. Combined total of 143 housing code violations in 23 months. He has a pattern. He buys buildings cheap, cuts maintenance costs to maximize profit, ignores violations, and cycles out tenants before they can organize." The room was silent. People were leaning forward, paying attention. "Chicago has strong tenant protection laws, but they only work if we enforce them together." I clicked to the next slide. "Here's what we're going to do. First, everyone documents everything. Every violation, every ignored repair request, every illegal charge. Photographs with timestamps, written logs, witnesses. We build an airtight case." Mrs. Chen raised her hand. "Robert, what if he retaliates? What if he evicts us?" "He can't. Illinois Retaliatory Eviction Act, 765 ILCS 720. It's illegal to evict tenants for reporting code violations or organizing. If he tries, we sue, and we win." A younger tenant in the back, Sarah from 3B, spoke up. "I'm a paralegal. I can help with legal documentation. Another tenant, Michael from 2C, raised his hand. I'm a CPA. I can analyze the financial records if we can get them. This was happening. People were mobilizing. Second, I continued, we file individual complaints for every violation. Not just heat, everything. Pest control, water damage, electrical hazards, mold, broken locks, missing smoke detectors. We bury the Department of Buildings in legitimate documented complaints. I clicked to another slide showing the penalty structure. Class A violations like lack of heat, $500 per day per unit. Class B violations like pest infestations, $200 per day per unit. Class C violations like broken fixtures, $100 per day per unit. This building currently has at least 47 documented violations across all categories. The daily fine exposure is approximately $18,000 per day. The Johnsons, the elderly couple from 1B, looked at each other. Mr. Johnson spoke. Robert, what's the endgame here? What do we actually want? Good question. I'd been thinking about that since 3:47 a.m. on January 12th, when I woke up freezing. We want a building that's safe, maintained, and affordable. We want a landlord who follows the law. If Victor can be that landlord, fine. If not, we want him gone. How do we get rid of a building owner? Someone asked. I smiled. We make ownership so expensive, so legally complicated, and so publicly humiliating that he sells. And when he sells, we make sure the buyer is someone who'll treat us fairly. Chicago has right of first refusal laws for tenant associations. If we organize properly, we can potentially buy this building ourselves. The room erupted in conversation. Buy the building? Form a tenant association? This was bigger than anyone had imagined. I let them talk for a few minutes, then continued. Third step, we go public. Local news loves stories about slumlords exploiting elderly tenants during winter. We contact Block Club Chicago, Chicago Tribune, ABC 7 I-Team. We make Victor Kozlov a household name for all the wrong reasons. Sarah, the paralegal, raised her hand again. Robert, I have a contact at Block Club. They've covered housing issues before. I can reach out. Perfect. But we don't go to media until we have overwhelming documentation. I want this case to be bulletproof. I clicked to my final slide. It was a timeline. Here's the plan. Week 1, document everything. I've created a shared Google folder. Everyone uploads photos, receipts, emails, text messages, everything. Week 2, file formal complaints with Buildings Department. 1 complaint per violation, properly formatted. Week 3, retain legal counsel. I'm reaching out to the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. They do pro bono work for tenant groups. Mrs. Chen was crying. Not from sadness, from hope. Robert, why are you doing this? You could just move. Your lease is until June. You could leave and avoid all this trouble. I thought about Margaret. How she'd spent her last months worrying about vulnerable people. How she'd volunteered at the senior center teaching immigrants English. How she'd believed that the world only gets better when people who can fight actually do fight. Mrs. Chen, I'm doing this because I can. Because I have time, resources, and knowledge that some of you don't have. And because Victor Kozlov made a critical mistake. What mistake? He assumed an old man would be too tired or too scared to fight back. He underestimated me. That's going to cost him everything he has. The meeting ended with assignments. Everyone took responsibility for documenting specific issues. Sarah would coordinate legal research. Michael, the CPA, would analyze financial records. James agreed to be our liaison with other elderly tenants who weren't tech-savvy. I went back to my still freezing apartment and found an email from Victor's lawyer. Subject line, cease and desist, tenant harassment. The email accused me of harassing other tenants, organizing illegal activities, and defaming Victor's character. It demanded I stop all organizational activities immediately or face legal action. I forwarded it to Sarah. She called me within minutes. Robert, this is hilarious. There's no such thing as illegal tenant organizing. This is an intimidation tactic, and it's actually more evidence of retaliation. Can we use this? Absolutely. Save everything. Every threatening email, every aggressive interaction. It demonstrates a pattern of retaliation, which is illegal and strengthens our case. That night, the heat came back on. Not because Victor had a change of heart, because Inspector Santos had issued an emergency order with immediate enforcement. The building heat had been restored at 4:47 p.m., exactly 37 hours and 23 minutes after it had been shut off. But Victor had run the boiler at minimum required temperatures, not the comfortable 72 degrees the previous owner had maintained. My apartment reached 68 degrees by 9 p.m., legally compliant but deliberately uncomfortable. Fine, I could work with legally compliant. In fact, I preferred it, because now Victor had established a pattern of doing the absolute minimum required by law, and I was about to show him what malicious compliance really looked like. January 15th through January 21st was documentation week. 22 tenants uploaded 347 photographs, 89 videos, 134 email chains, and 67 maintenance requests to our shared folder. The evidence was overwhelming. Broken radiators, leaking pipes, mold growth, pest infestations, exposed wiring, missing carbon monoxide detectors, broken windows, non-functioning fire escapes. The building was a disaster, but the most damaging evidence came from Michael, our CPA tenant. He'd requested public records from the Cook County Assessor's Office and discovered something beautiful. Victor had been claiming tax deductions for building improvements he'd never made. He'd reported spending $127,000 on building upgrades in 2022, but there was no evidence of any work being done. No permits pulled, no contractor invoices in the building files, no visible improvements. That was tax fraud. Federal crime. I added it to the documentation file. By January 22nd, we were ready for Phase 2. We filed 47 individual complaints with the Chicago Department of Buildings. Each complaint was meticulously documented with photographs, timestamps, witness statements, and relevant code sections. Inspector Santos must have thought she'd won the lottery. A building with 47 documented violations was an inspector's dream. She scheduled a comprehensive inspection for January 26th. "Mr. Mitchell," she told me on the phone, "I'm bringing a team. We're doing a floor-to-ceiling audit of the entire property. Tell your neighbors to be available. We'll need access to every unit." I sent a message to the building group chat. "Inspection scheduled Thursday, January 26, 9 a.m. Please be available to let inspectors into your units." This is how we win. 23 people responded with thumbs-up emojis. We were unified, organized, dangerous. Victor knew it too. On January 24th, he sent an email to all tenants offering a deal. "To valued residents, I'm aware there have been some concerns about building maintenance. I want to assure you that all issues will be addressed promptly. Additionally, I'm offering a 1-month rent credit to all current tenants as a gesture of goodwill. Please respond by January 25th to accept this offer. Sincerely, Victor Kozlov." It was a trap. The 1-month rent credit was designed to create a legal argument that tenants had been compensated for violations. It would undermine our complaint. I sent a message to the group: "Do not accept Victor's rent credit offer. This is a legal tactic to weaken our case. Accepting money could be interpreted as settling your claims. Decline politely or don't respond." 22 people declined. Victor's tactic had failed. January 26th. The inspection team arrived at 9:03 a.m., 4 inspectors, including Maria Santos. They spent 9 hours examining every inch of the building. By 6 p.m., they documented 73 violations. Not 47, 73. The inspection had uncovered additional problems we hadn't even noticed. Structural issues, electrical code violations dating back to the 1970s, plumbing that didn't meet current standards. Inspector Santos handed me a copy of the preliminary report. "Mr. Mitchell, this is one of the worst properties I've inspected in 5 years. The total fines, if all violations remain unaddressed, will exceed $22,000 per day." I did the math. If violations had existed for an average of 180 days, that was $360,000 in penalties. Victor Kozlov was drowning, but he didn't know it yet. On January 28th, Victor received the official violation notice. 73 violations. Detailed remediation requirements. 14-day deadline for emergency violations. 30-day deadline for serious violations. 60-day deadline for minor violations. He had two choices. Spend approximately $340,000 to bring the building up to code, or face millions in fines. That's when Victor made his third and final catastrophic mistake. He decided to sell the building, fast, but he didn't tell the tenants. He listed it quietly with a commercial real estate broker. Sale price, $2,400,000. The listing described it as an investment opportunity with value-add potential. Translation, a mess that someone else could fix and profit from. Sarah, our paralegal tenant, discovered the listing on February 3rd. She had a Google alert set for the building address. Robert, he's selling. The listing went live yesterday. I opened the real estate listing on my laptop. It was full of lies. Well-maintained property, strong tenant base, excellent cash flow. None of that was true. The property was a disaster. The tenants were organized and litigious, and the cash flow was about to be devastated by code violation fines. I smiled. Victor thought he could sell the building and escape. He had no idea that Illinois law requires sellers to disclose material defects and pending legal issues. And 73 housing code violations definitely qualified. Sarah, I said, can we file a disclosure complaint? Absolutely. If he's selling without disclosing the violations, that's fraud. The buyer could sue and the sale could be voided. Do it. On February 5th, Sarah filed a complaint with the Illinois Attorney General's office. Real estate fraud. Failure to disclose material defects. The complaint included all 73 violation notices, a documentation of Victor's pattern of neglect, and evidence that he'd listed the property without disclosing pending legal issues. The Attorney General's office sent an investigator within a week. Meanwhile, I was working on Phase 3 of our plan, media exposure. I contacted Melissa Rodriguez, an investigative reporter at Block Club Chicago who specialized in housing issues. Melissa, I have a story for you. Slumlord with 7 buildings, 143 violations, currently trying to sell a building with 73 active code violations without disclosing them to potential buyers. And he cut heat to 24 units during a polar vortex to retaliate against tenant organizing. Melissa's response came within an hour. When can we meet? February 12th. Melissa interviewed 15 tenants, reviewed all our documentation, and photographed the violations. Her article went live on February 15th. The headline was perfect. North Side landlord faces millions in fines after cutting heat during polar vortex. The article was devastating. It detailed every violation, included photographs of the worst conditions, and quoted extensively from tenants. Mrs. Chen describing her fear of eviction, James talking about sleeping in 41-degree temperatures, Maria explaining how her security deposit had been stolen, but the most damaging part was the financial analysis. Melissa had done her research. She discovered that Victor had similar violations at all 7 of his properties. Combined total fines across his portfolio, $6,700,000. The article went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been shared 12,000 times. Local TV stations picked it up. ABC 7 sent a crew to interview tenants. Victor's face was suddenly on the evening news, identified as one of Chicago's worst landlords. His real estate listing disappeared on February 16th. The buyer had backed out after seeing the news coverage. No one wanted to buy a building with millions in code violations and organized media-savvy tenants. Victor was trapped. He couldn't sell. He couldn't afford to fix the violations. And the fines were accumulating at $22,000 per day. On February 20th, his lawyer called me. Mr. Mitchell, my client would like to negotiate a resolution. What kind of resolution? He's willing to make immediate repairs, reduce rents by 15% for all tenants, and waive late fees for 6 months. Not interested. The lawyer sounded surprised. Mr. Mitchell, that's a very generous offer. Your client cut our heat in January. He threatened me at 6 a.m. with 2 thugs. He's been stealing security deposits and charging illegal fees for months. He's facing millions in fines and potential criminal charges. Tell Victor I'll accept one resolution. He sells the building to our tenant association at a fair price, or we'll pursue every legal remedy available until he's bankrupted. The lawyer was quiet. I'll convey your message. 2 days later, Victor's lawyer sent a formal offer. Victor would sell the building to the tenant association for $100,000, 20% below market value. The offer included a provision that all code violations would be remedied before the sale closed, and that all current tenants could remain at their current rent rates for a minimum of 2 years. I called a building meeting. 22 people showed up. Victor wants to sell us the building for $1.9 million. He'll fix all violations first and guarantee our rent rates for 2 years. What do you think? The room erupted in excitement. But I held up my hand. Before we celebrate, we need to discuss how we'd finance this. None of us individually can afford a $1.9 million building. But together, as a limited equity housing cooperative, we might. Sarah had done the research. I've been talking to the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. They work with tenant groups to form housing co-ops. Basically, we'd pool our resources, get a collective mortgage, and own the building together. Each unit becomes a co-op share. Instead of paying rent to Victor, we'd pay into the co-op to cover mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Michael, our CPA, pulled out his laptop. I ran the numbers. If we get financing at current rates, the monthly co-op fee would be about $1,200 per unit. That's $250 less than current rent. Plus, we'd be building equity instead of paying a landlord. Mrs. Chen raised her hand. But I don't have money for a down payment. I'm on a fixed income. That's the beauty of a limited equity co-op, Sarah explained. The down payment is pooled. Some members contribute more, some contribute less, based on ability. And there are city programs that provide financing assistance for co-op conversions, especially when it involves keeping housing affordable. I'd already researched this. The city of Chicago has a multifamily housing revenue bond program. They provide low-interest loans specifically for affordable housing preservation. I spoke with someone at the Department of Housing yesterday. They said a project like ours would likely qualify. The room was buzzing with possibility. A tenant-owned building. No more predatory landlords. No more sudden rent increases. No more ignored maintenance. Here's what I propose, I said. We form a steering committee. Sarah handles legal structure. Michael handles finances. I'll coordinate with the city programs and manage the technical aspects of the purchase. We need 4 more volunteers for building management planning. 6 hands went up. We had our committee. Over the next 3 weeks, we worked around the clock. Sarah filed incorporation papers for the Sheffield Avenue Housing Cooperative. Michael created a detailed financial model. I submitted applications to 3 different city financing programs. We held informational sessions for all 24 units, explaining how the co-op would work. By March 15th, we had secured preliminary approval for financing. The city's multifamily revenue bond program would provide $400,000 at 3.2% interest. A community development credit union would provide an additional $400,000. We needed $100,000 in member equity contributions. 24 families contributing an average of $4,166 each. It was ambitious, but possible. 18 units committed immediately. 6 were hesitant. They didn't have savings for the equity contribution. That's when something beautiful happened. The tenants with more resources started a solidarity fund. Those who could afford to contribute more did. Michael contributed $12,000. Sarah contributed $8,000. I contributed $15,000 from the life insurance payout I'd received when Margaret died within 2 weeks. We'd raised $127,000, more than enough to cover all 24 units, including those who couldn't contribute. By April 3rd, we had a signed purchase agreement. Victor would sell 2847 North Sheffield Avenue to the Sheffield Avenue Housing Cooperative for $1,900,000. Closing date, June 1st, 2023. Contingent on Victor completing all 73 code violation repairs. Victor hired contractors. Spent $340,000 bringing the building up to code. New boiler, updated electrical, pest remediation, plumbing repairs, mold removal, structural reinforcement. Every single violation addressed. Inspector Santos did the final walkthrough on May 15th. Mr. Mitchell, I've never seen a transformation like this. This building is now one of the best maintained properties in Lincoln Park. Meanwhile, the city was pursuing the accumulated fines. Victor had violated code for an average of 180 days across 73 violations. The math was brutal. The Department of Buildings calculated total fines of $347,000. Victor's lawyer negotiated a settlement. He'd pay $850,000 in fines in exchange for the city dropping the larger claim. The settlement was contingent on him completing all repairs and selling the building. Victor was losing everything. The building sale at $1,900,000 barely covered his $150,000 remaining mortgage, plus the $340,000 in repairs. After paying $850,000 in fines, he walked away with nothing. Actually, less than nothing. He'd lost money on the deal, but the consequences went deeper. The media coverage had destroyed his reputation. Two of his other buildings had organized tenant associations. They were using our model, documenting violations, filing complaints, demanding repairs or co-op conversions. By May 2023, Victor faced organized resistance at 4 of his 7 properties. Combined fines across his portfolio exceeded $4,200,000. His lenders were calling notes. His insurance had been cancelled. He was drowning in legal fees. On May 22nd, Block Club Chicago published a follow-up article, Tenant Organizing Leads to Co-op Conversion of North Side Building. The article detailed our entire campaign, the documentation, the complaints, the media strategy, the financing, the cooperative structure. It became a blueprint. Within 3 months, 5 other buildings in Chicago had used our model to fight back against negligent landlords. The Lawyers Committee for Better Housing started a tenant organizing toolkit based on our documentation methods. I was invited to speak at a housing rights conference. June 1st, 2023, closing day. 24 tenant families gathered at the title company office. We signed papers making us collective owners of 2847 North Sheffield Avenue. When the last signature was complete, Mrs. Chen started crying. I own my home. For the first time in my life, I own my home. The celebration that night was beautiful. We gathered in the building lobby. Someone brought champagne. James made a toast. To Robert Mitchell, who turned an engineering mindset into a weapon for justice. I raised my glass. To all of us. We did this together. Victor Kozlov thought he could exploit people who were old, tired, or scared. He was wrong. Never underestimate organized people who know their rights. But the story wasn't quite over. In August 2023, Victor Kozlov filed for bankruptcy. His real estate empire collapsed. All 7 buildings went into foreclosure. The city seized 2 of them for unpaid fines. Tenant associations purchased 3 others using our co-op model. The remaining 2 were sold to a non-profit affordable housing developer. Victor's total losses exceeded $8,000. His property management license was revoked. The Attorney General's office filed criminal charges for tax fraud related to the fake improvement deductions. He pleaded guilty in October 2023 and received 18 months in federal prison plus $340,000 in restitution. I attended the sentencing hearing, sat in the gallery watching Victor in an orange jumpsuit. The judge's words were pointed. Mr. Kozlov, you systematically exploited vulnerable people. You prioritized profit over safety. You retaliated against tenants who exercised their legal rights. Your actions endangered lives. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes. After the hearing, Inspector Maria Santos found me in the hallway. Robert, I want you to know something. I've been an inspector for 12 years. I've seen hundreds of bad landlords. But I've rarely seen tenants organize the way you did. You built a case that was perfect. Every document in order, every photograph time-stamped, every witness statement corroborated. It was beautiful work. "I'm an engineer," I said. "Documentation is what we do. It's more than that. You gave people hope. You showed them that the system works if you know how to use it." She was right. The system does work, but only if you understand it. Only if you're willing to fight. Only if you have the patience to build an airtight case brick by brick, violation by violation, photograph by photograph. Today, I'm 69 years old. I live in Unit 4B of the Sheffield Avenue Housing Cooperative. My monthly co-op fee is $1,150, which is $300 less than I was paying Victor. The building is maintained beautifully. We have a management committee that handles repairs promptly. We have reserves for capital improvements. We have community events in the lobby. Mrs. Chen still teaches piano in 3C. James waters the plants in the hallway. Sarah chairs the legal committee. Michael manages the finances. We're not just neighbors anymore. We're co-owners, partners, a community. Last month, a tenant from another building called me. Their landlord had cut heat during a cold snap. "Mr. Mitchell, I heard about what you did at Sheffield Avenue. Can you help us?" I smiled.
"Do you have a smartphone?"
"Yes." "Good. Start taking photographs. Document everything. Get timestamps. Build your case. I'll send you the toolkit. Because that's the thing about malicious compliance. Once you learn how to weaponize the rules against people who think they're above them, you can teach others. The knowledge spreads. The resistance grows. Victor Kozlov thought he was cutting heat to freeze out an old man. Instead, he ignited something that would burn down his entire empire. And the fire is still spreading. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a reporter at the New York Times. They're doing a national story on tenant organizing and co-op conversions. They want to feature our building. "Mr. Mitchell," the reporter asked, "what would you say to other tenants facing similar situations?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Thought about Margaret and how she'd always believed in fighting for what's right. Thought about Mrs. Chen crying when she signed the co-op papers. Thought about Victor in that orange jumpsuit. I tell them that knowledge is power. Laws exist to protect tenants, but only if you enforce them. Document everything, stay calm. Build your case methodically. Find allies, and never ever underestimate what organized people can accomplish. What about landlords who think they can get away with exploitation? I tell them to be very, very careful. Because somewhere out there is a retired engineer with time, knowledge, and a smartphone. And that person might just cost you everything. The article published last week. How one Chicago building fought back and won. It's been shared 47,000 times. I've received emails from tenant groups in 23 states asking for advice. The Sheffield Avenue model is becoming a movement. And it all started because Victor Kozlov made a simple miscalculation. He cut my heat on January 12th at 3:47 a.m. He thought I'd just suffer in silence or move out. Instead, I documented the temperature, filed a complaint, organized my neighbors, built an airtight case, exposed his crimes, destroyed his business, took his building, and taught thousands of other tenants how to do the same. That's the power of malicious compliance. You don't break the rules. You enforce them so precisely, so relentlessly, so perfectly that the person who thought they were above the law gets crushed under the weight of their own violations. Victor Kozlov learned a word that night in January: compliance. He learned what happens when an engineer decides to make you comply with every single rule, regulation, and code requirement, every single one. The heat came back on 37 hours later, but by then it was too late. The documentation had started. The case was building. The reckoning was inevitable, and for Victor Kozlov, winter lasted a lot longer than 3 months. It lasted forever. Sometimes justice is served hot. Sometimes it's served cold. In this case, it was served at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and 66 degrees at night, as specified by Chicago Municipal Code Section 512-1110. Because when you're an engineer, precision isn't just a habit, it's a weapon. And I just spent 40 years learning how to use it.